Welcome to the How We Are Human podcast, which aims to explore the various ways that we humans know ourselves. My name is Magdalena Smieszek, and this is part 3 of the discussion at the Central European University with Maria Kronfeldner, professor in the philosophy department, and 3 master students, Olesya Bondarenko, Noha Hendi, and Rachel Sanderoff, who have spent several weeks in the course entitled Topics in the Philosophy of the Human and Social Sciences. We continue our discussion about how the different disciplines of study produce knowledge and contribute to our understanding of the human, and I begin with that final burning question. If you were asked, what is a human? What is humanity? How do you answer that question?
Well,
Personally, not as
part
of the
Egypt
course.
They are asking this question.
Okay, well there you go. Well, see, that's even significant.
They
there.
will never ask what is a human is because they have very clear definition of human versus animals versus plants, and everyone is totally differentiated from the other. Because this is what I was talking about. Like, for example, the Egyptian community or the Egyptian society doesn't pose that question. It doesn't bother them. They have other questions. So this is why I see that even this is a very important question, but you should think what are the priorities of people. So they don't have the question of humanity, but they have other questions like what is religion, what is science. This is heavily debated. Like where should we go to the religious discourse or to the scientific discourse? And then when you think of the scientific discourse, you are a little bit afraid because, okay, the whole corpus of science was answering questions born in the West. We cannot deny this. Now that I'm studying the history of science, I can see this clearly because before this, I was very dogmatic toward the science. No religion, science is best. But now it's not the case anymore. So, well, what is a human? A human is me, you, anybody in this room.
Right. But even in Egypt, people are asking, who am I? Right? So there's what you're saying, there's different answers that they can turn to religion or they can
in
turn
Egypt
to biology.
we have, no, they don't turn to biology because...
You did.
Yeah, I did turn to biology because I didn't like the answers that are given in the religious discourse and how powerful they are about defining who is a human and who is a woman, who is a man. I didn't like these answers, so that's why I found biology giving equality to people, and everybody is like, there's no difference. But of course, the scientific discourse isn't as powerful as the religious, so nobody is listening to it.
But in that discourse, is it still a question of who am I in relation to a supreme being or whatnot? Or is it an understanding of humanity as a whole? Because you're saying that different parts of the world, they don't think about other humans in other places.
It's not an understanding. And I don't think you have the luxury to ask such questions in a society having so many problems. So even if you don't have your basic needs, you will not be wondering about who is a human and who is not. The problem is when you are getting your own answers about who is a human only from religion, you have no any other discourse. So the whole society is thinking the same. And if someone is trying to be a little bit different, if someone is trying to say, well, I am a homosexual, this is totally refused and rejected, and you're outcast from society to the point of violence. It's not just rejecting. So I'm not sure how can you pose this question.
But would you see that as being, that would be inhuman, right?
Yeah,
what I'm asking is there that idea of as you're describing, like even people living in poverty, they're not thinking about, every human being on earth. They're thinking about their own experience, but they are still thinking of themselves in terms of I should be treated a certain way, or I should have certain things because I am human, whether that comes from their understanding of religion or somewhere else, right?
Yeah, we have this definition of human as just a male Muslim Sunni who is, with a dark complexion. So this is the definition of human. And everybody else is just, we don't care about them.
Yeah, fascinating.
Well, I kind of agree that it's a kind of a, like Noha said, lecture question. It's kind of an idle question, basically. A question that cannot be answered. And also a question that rings a little bit old-fashioned to me, because it's definitely not the kind of question that we are asking today. And 40 years ago, Michel Foucault wrote in one of his books that the category of man, which is very much a historical construct, will soon disappear. Well, we don't really see it disappearing yet, but it might be this preoccupation with what is a human and with creating all of these divisions and so on and so forth. It might be something, more like a sort of passing intellectual fad, which will go away eventually. So I don't think that
you wouldn't answer it.
I wouldn't answer it, and I don't think we should be too preoccupied with this question, because it's basically this question does not really have an object.
Yeah, fair enough. But I think in the end, people are asking that question, right? Like it's part of the self-understanding of like what makes me, and therefore what makes everybody else. So I don't know if I can see that question going away, maybe in the terms of human and humanity, but like fundamentally self-understanding.
Yeah, maybe it's taking different forms. If you think of the immigration policies, like who is entitled to what and who is not. So yeah, it comes like I deserve 1, 2, 3 because I am this person and the other person doesn't deserve it. So yeah, it comes in direct forms, but it seems that there is no answer. That's why there is these policies that are trying very hard. Actually, the policies are the who are trying very hard to define human and to define who is Muslim, who is not Muslim, who is Arab, who is not Arab, because we want to pose our policies.
Of course, we'll go on asking who we are and what we are and how we should best treat each other. And those are questions that we should and will continue to ask and continue to get different answers to over time, which basically undercuts the notion that you can give an answer to what is a human. I think any kind of question like that, what is a human, what is truth, what is good, what is justice, these kind of questions, in order to give an answer, seeming answer to them, would rely on a certain metaphysics. And since Foucault came up, I'd bring in one of my favorite Nietzsche quotes, which is the idea is that the only thing that we can define are things which have no history, and by implication, future things which are somehow historically determined. And for Nietzsche, I think he basically meant everything's that way. We can't really define things. And I think that's particularly true for what is a human.
I actually have a question for Magdalena as a human rights scholar. So would you say that the concept of human is absolutely indispensable in the area in which you work, or do you think other concepts could maybe do the same job? Because, I mean, I don't know that literature very well, but I think at least in some areas of philosophy, I think there is some critique of the whole human rights discourse going on. And it's not because people don't believe in the necessity or the fundamental importance of rights, but just the way it is formulated. Maybe they believe it could be sort of, conceptualized in some different way. So is there anything that you could add from your field?
Yeah, well, in human rights, of course, going back, the history is very much grounded in theology, whether I repeat this often, whether human rights lawyers want to acknowledge it or not. It is, but it's more or less about what is the human or humane treatment or inhumane treatment, and then it sort of broadens from that. But it's very much like based on that idea of the relationship between humans more than anything. And I think now why I'm especially interested in this, everything you've said, and this subject, especially because modern culture is so critical of human rights, saying, oh, these human rights, it's not working. It's somehow not giving us this humanity, this shared humanity that we're supposed to have. Something's wrong. Well, what's wrong fundamentally is because I believe we don't understand ourselves in all these different ways, in a way where we can bridge those, as we're saying, that knowledge to a realization of human rights. So if we understood, let's say, more about the biology of aggression or mental illness or rape or whatnot, we knew more about that, then we would be able to legislate better about these things. We would be able to have a more open discourse about when you're talking about this issue in a court case, for example. Whose human rights are you talking about, and how are you conceiving that person between a victim and a perpetrator, for example? I mean, there's all these different directions of how you can infuse the human rights discourse with these different sciences. That's ultimately not being done. So I think it's still very much in the realm of social science. We talk about humanity, we talk about human beings, human everything. It's all human rights is, repetitively about the human and humanity, but it doesn't break apart of what exactly are we talking about. It's a conversation that needs to continue. So Maria, final words of discourse.
No answer.
Oh, come on. For all that knowledge, years of thinking about these questions, about human nature.
So what is human nature is already a different question than what is a human being.
Right.
And I think there are many questions that we can slice out of this one, what is a human? And then I go on. I know this is the game philosophers do, and everyone hates us for that. What do you mean by what is a human nature? So what is a human? What is a nature? And then you with human, you can already say, okay, do you mean Homo sapiens? That would be a biological group. Do you mean persons? That would be more a social group. And how do you delineate between these groups? Then you might think about individual properties and then relations. And you mentioned relations, about how we relate to each other. I think that's important for human rights. And then you make progress on clarifying the question on the human. And then if you go on with clarifying the question of nature, then we have something that Rachel mentioned about, and Olesya too, about there is no essence, in the sense as people have looked for, not since quite a long time, at least since Greek antiquity, in the tradition of the West. So if that's the question, whether there is an essence to what it means to be human, I say no, there is not. But there are things that we can say about humans in general, things about how we are. I think there are truths about us from the social sciences, humanities, and natural sciences gathered together. And they're important for a human rights dialogue, for politics. But what they are is not, as I said before, that's essentially contested, because the truth about us are plenty. And then we need to choose between, of these many truths, which we think are important about us, which we share. What kind of people should there be? How should we be? And that's the connection between human and humane, which is often kind of hard to delineate. So even though I agree with Olesya that Foucault was right, that a certain question about what it means to be human, about humanity, originated in a certain historical context, and it might end soon, that this question is relevant. If it hasn't ended already, as Noah said, we can't afford that kind of questions in certain contexts because they're more direct problems. But for colonialism, it was quite an important practical question at that time, whether these people over there are humans, and that means, can we missionize them? If I'm a religious missionary, can I enslave them, etc., etc. These were all issues at that time, the question was practically important. Right now, it seems that's not, but I hesitate to fully give in to Foucault because I do think that in our minds, we use the category of the human to say some people are more human, some are less human. When we look at refugees, and if I identify myself as a Hungarian, I might look more down to refugees compared to if I say I'm a human, and then I might see easier that this is also human. So the category of the human again can also be creating equality, right? And that's what the human rights discourse is feeding on in a way. So on the one hand, it's historical. On the other hand, it's a psychological category that we use in order to relate to each other. And so it's not giving into Nietzsche. It's not completely, you can't completely historicize it, but you can relativize it. And that's why there is no final answer.
We conclude here the discussion at the Central European University about topics in the philosophy of the human and social sciences with Maria Kronfeldner, Olesya Bondarenko, Noha Hendi, and Rachel Sanderoff. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and will continue with the series that will tackle the many issues and questions about how we are human, including academic discussions as well as everyday human stories about how we humans know ourselves. My name is Magdalena Smieszek, and I thank you for listening.